Good evening and welcome to Cheryl's Kitchen. I'm Charlie Niner, the host, writer, and producer of this show. My subjects often deal with violence and traumatic incidents, so viewer discretion is advised. I'd like to begin by dedicating this particular episode to the troops of the 2nd Battalion, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, second to none. A nation ruled with an iron fist, made up of several different ethnicities, and those ethnic groups sometimes were united but often fought each other very violently and very bloodily. Atrocities were committed by all sides, but all sides will deny it and accuse the others. While this conglomeration was united, it was ruled with an iron fist, but when that dictator died, it didn't take long until those old ethnic tensions reappeared. We witnessed a nation descend into hell. The world witnessed massacres of innocent civilians who happened to be the wrong ethnicity. This wasn't war, this was madness. This was where we first heard the phrase ethnic cleansing, a euphemism for genocide. So, please join me on a trip to the former Republic of Yugoslavia, or as I will refer to, the FRY. It's been over 30 years since the breakup of the FRY. Most people have forgotten it happened or have never even known it happened. I can't speak for all the soldiers who served in the Balkans in the 90s, but I certainly won't forget the events that some of us witnessed. I'm sure most of my brothers in arms won't forget, but I am also sure some will wish they could forget. When I wrote this, I felt chills go through my body. Such can be the power of memory when you remember the cruelty of all human beings are capable of. So whereabouts is this former Republic of Yugoslavia? Well, it's in the southeast and central Europe. It's consisted of Bosnia-Herzegovina, Croatia, Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia with Kosovo and Vojvodina as protectorates, and Slovenia. It had quite a diverse ethnic population, consisting of Croats, Serbs, Slovenes, Bosnians, Montenegrins, Kosovars, Macedonians, Slovaks, Hungarians, Albanians, and I'm quite sure there were a few Romani thrown in there as well. There were over 40 different religions. I'll just highlight the major ones: Islam, Roman Catholicism, Judaism, Protestants, and Eastern Orthodox. As for languages spoken, mostly Serbo-Croatian, and some Albanian and some Hungarian. So I'll give you a brief history of former Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia actually means land of the Southern Slavs. So where do you want to begin when trying to tell someone about the history of a country that no longer exists? I'm going to refer to Carol Off's book, Ghosts of the Medak Pocket, occasionally, and good old Wikipedia, who has some good information on the former Republic of Yugoslavia. The actual nation of Yugoslavia didn't exist until 1918. It was named the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, and then renamed the Kingdom of Yugoslavia in 1929. Yugoslavia was invaded by the Axis powers in April of 1941. The partisans proclaimed it a democratic republic in 1943. The King of Yugoslavia at the time, Peter II, recognized the partisan government, and then he lost his job as the monarchy was abolished. In 1946, communist government was established, headed by Marshal Joseph Broz Tito. Marshal Tito ruled Yugoslavia until 1980, when he died. So we're going to come to our first rabbit hole. We found it already. And how did Tito gain power? During World War II, Yugoslavia signed an armistice with Germany after 11 days of fighting in April 1941. The Germans split the country. The independent state of Croatia was controlled by the Nazis, who used the Ustashi as puppets. This was not a good time in Croatia. The Ustashi were said to have executed 500,000 people. Remember the Ustashi. That name may come up again. There were two resistance movements. The Chetniks, remember this name, who were primarily pro-Serb. They were also pro-royalist. The others were the communist partisans, led by Marshal Tito, a pan-Yugo organization. Herein lies the problem. We have two guerrilla movements competing against each other. Eventually, the Chetniks were more interested in battling the partisans rather than the Axis. The partisans were the largest resistance movement in occupied West and Central Europe, fielding 800,000 men. The Chetniks became collaborators to the Axis powers, and the partisans, led by Tito, eventually threw the Axis powers out in 1945. The partisans became the de facto rulers of Yugoslavia with Tito as the prime minister. So you can see where that ethnic tension would rise, where the partisans were a pan-Yugo organization and the Chetniks were a pro-Serb organization, and all the fighting they did against one another would definitely raise ethnic tensions. So post-World War II, Yugoslavia was originally aligned with the USSR, but Tito was critical of the Eastern Bloc and NATO. In 1948, Tito declared Yugoslavia an independent communist nation. What he did was he basically flipped the bird to Stalin, a very gutsy move. In 1968, students in Belgrade protested, and in 1970-71, Croatian Spring demonstrated for greater freedom and autonomy of Croatia. But the 70s were like that everywhere, including the USA. The oil crisis in the 70s had a very negative effect on Yugoslavia. The government borrowed a lot of money, does this sound familiar? And incurred a lot of debt, like Romania did. Tito died in 1980. The ethnic tensions of the old rose up. Slobodan Milosevic, you'll hear this name again, the Serbian communist leader, tried to dominate, but Slovenia and Croatia resisted. This paved the road to war and the descent into madness. You'll recall Marshal Tito died in 1980, and a period of unrest followed. The first one to leave was the Republic of Slovenia, just to the west of Croatia. On 25 June 1991, Slovenia declared independence. The government in Belgrade took great exception to this and sent the JNA, or the Yugoslav National Army, to quell the upstart republic. The war lasted all of 10 days, also known as the 10-Day War. The Slovenes were smart. They managed to ensure their weapons were retained. Basically, the Slovenes conducted asymmetrical warfare, in reality, a guerrilla campaign. Remember, the partisans defeated the Nazis, and the Slovenes defeated the JNA. Slovenia had ensured its independence, but Wikipedia has a really extensive article on the subject. Croatia declared independence on the same day as Slovenia, but with very, very different results. The JNA and the Serbs aligned paramilitary groups openly attacked Croatia, and at the end of 1991, Croatia had lost about one-third of its territory. Serb paramilitary groups terrorized, killed, and expelled Croats living in the Serb-held areas, also known as the Serb Krajina, Krajina meaning frontier. Croats did the same to the Serbs in Croatian territory, although the government of Croatia wanted them to stop, according to Wikipedia. Some will probably disagree. In fact, Croats had murdered a police officer, and neither side, Croat or Serb, can claim the moral high ground. The JNA had joined up with the Krajina rebels. Arkan's Tigers, a Serb ethnic cleansing paramilitary group, killed or expelled Croats in the Serb-held Krajina. Ratko Mladic, a Serb, was the author of this ethnic cleansing. It was reciprocated by the Croats, who performed their own ethnic cleansing. You'll hear more of Mr. Ratko Mladic. Now it appears the two presidents, Croatian and Serb, were to divide Bosnia. Now, if you remember the pact that Stalin and Hitler signed, this was a little bit similar. Imagine your neighbor is now your enemy. That's the madness that was Croatia in brief. Vukovar stands out in all this. Vukovar, which was in Sector East, right along the Danube, had been pounded into the ground by artillery and mortar fire. When it fell, the surviving Croats were rounded up, executed, and buried in a mass grave. International politics always seem to move slowly, but in February 1992, UNPROFOR, the United Nations Protection Force, was created. Now we're going to go down another rabbit hole, but not today. Bosnia decides to declare its independence in March 1992, and we'll look at Bosnia in another episode. So this is where I'm going to end this today. Every side in this war has blood on its hands. Nobody is totally innocent. However, some groups had better PR than others. I think you'd have to go back hundreds of years to totally understand why Croatia, or the former Republic of Yugoslavia, fell the way it did. And I'm not sure if I'll ever truly understand it. Thank you very much for listening. If you like this, please give it a thumbs up. And until next time, don't believe anything you hear and only half of what you see.